Kendrick Johnson, born on October 10, 1995 to Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, was the youngest among his siblings. Jacqueline fondly remembers him as the source of laughter, joy, and vitality in their household. Known for his fun-loving nature, politeness, and exceptional talent in sports, Kendrick excelled as a basketball player and was a valued member of the school's football team. Additionally, he had a deep passion for science and mathematics. His dad said he had a knack for numbers, keeping accounts in his head of all his allowances. Kendrick had a promising and exciting future ahead of him, with big dreams of playing professional football one day. Lowndes High School is a sprawling campus near the Georgia-Florida state line, attended by 3,000 students. The school day drew to a close, and students and staff began to filter out of the building. 17-year-old Kendrick was set to stay after school for a basketball game. He often stayed for sports and various activities, so when he didn't return home after the game had finished, Jacqueline at first wasn't too worried. But Kendrick didn't come home at all that night, and as his 10 p.m. curfew rolled around, Jacqueline decided to drive to the school herself to try and find him. With no luck spotting him anywhere, she called the police and reported him missing at 12:30 a.m. The police tried to assure Jacqueline that Kendrick was probably out with some friends or maybe even a girlfriend, but his mother knew this wasn't the case and that something was deeply wrong. Jacqueline was back at the school, frantically handing out flyers and asking anyone and everyone if they had seen her son. She spoke with the school counselors and staff, and it was determined that Kendrick had not been present in his fourth period weight training class the previous day. Jacqueline commented on how unusual it was for her son to skip classes, and the staff agreed with her. Around the same time, a group of students were in the school's gymnasium, in the corner by the wrestling mats. One of the students said she noticed feet with socks coming out of the hole in one of the rolled-up mats that was in a vertical position. At first, she thought someone was playing a joke, but soon realized something was desperately wrong and called some of her friends for help. More students and a teacher tried to help free whoever was inside. The teacher said, "I reached and grabbed one of his ankles, hoping for a response. There was none, and I knew he was lifeless at that point. Strong smells were emitting from inside the mat, and once upright, the mat was pulled down to the floor. They could see blood and vomit where the mat had been. Come to Lowndes High School now. There's a dead body out here." "Okay, where at, sir?" "Lowndes High School in the old gym." Tragically, they found the body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. He had been head first in the center of the vertical rolled-up wrestling mat. His jeans were unzipped, and his front pockets were partially pulled out. In his left pocket was an LG phone, and his headphones were found wrapped around his hand. When the mat was first unrolled, Kendrick had one arm stretched above his head and the other down around his waist. His face was bloody, bloated, and swollen beyond all recognition. It is one of the most horrific images we have ever seen. Some officers were in the school already following up on the missing persons report, but more police were dispatched at 10:32 a.m., arriving at the school at 10:35. Classes were changing over, people were milling around, and word was quickly spreading that a fellow student had been discovered deceased. Tragically, Jacqueline would find this out by overhearing a telephone call. Jacqueline and Kenneth said they weren't allowed to see Kendrick or enter the gym, and Kendrick's sister had to identify her brother by looking at his shoe that was found on the floor. The school went into lockdown, and one student said as everyone was gathering outside, "It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop." Kendrick was pronounced dead at the scene, and his time of death would later be confirmed as before 2 p.m. on January 10, 2013. Police quickly deemed the case to be nothing more than a tragic accident, but many others weren't convinced. Looking at the way in which Kendrick was found, the mat stood at nearly 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. When rolled up, the hole in the center measured 14 inches wide. Kendrick's shoulders measured 19 inches across, and he was 5 foot 10 inches tall. Police argued it was possible that if Kendrick was trying to squeeze into the center of the mat, he could have scrunched his shoulders together with his arms outstretched to make himself narrower. But his parents maintained that his size versus the size of the mat alone was enough to debunk this theory. The reason why police came to the conclusion they did was because of the shoe found near Kendrick's head on the floor. One student said that he and Kendrick shared a pair of shoes, and that after class they would go to the mats, jump up, and throw the shoes inside the middle of the hole. Other students also told police that it was common for them to leave their belongings in the mats when they didn't want to pay for a locker. Investigators speculated that Kendrick had got inside the gym mat when he was trying to retrieve his shoes, and tragically, he had become stuck and suffocated. However, students and friends of Kendrick said they would always tilt the mat to the side and grab their belongings out the bottom as opposed to going inside the mats. It made no sense as to why Kendrick would go head first into the rolled-up mat rather than just pushing it aside or pushing it over to grab his shoes. The shoe on the ground below Kendrick's head inside the mat was on top of a pool of blood and vomit, but there was no blood or vomit on the shoe itself. The other shoe that made up this pair were lying nearby. But if this in fact was what happened due to Kendrick's size and how tightly he would have been stuck inside the mat, even more questions were raised as to how one shoe would end up outside the mat and the other would be inside. If he was so wedged in with little to no space, how would he have been able to get the shoe out from the bottom, throw it up past his feet with it landing on the floor? The crime scene photos also showed a pair of gray, white, and orange Nike shoes tucked in behind Kendrick's knees. A police report stated that a pair of shoes that bore similar colors to the ones found behind Kendrick's knees were also found on the floor by the bleachers. People began to wonder if he had been reaching for his shoes. Where did the other pair by his knees come from? And what, if any, relevance did the shoes by the bleachers bear? Jacqueline was able to confirm part of this. She said that the black and white Adidas shoes were the ones he always changed into in the gym, but the shoes that were found behind his knees were the ones he had been wearing. So how did they come to be in that position? According to a police report, a hoodie, a yellow folder, and a textbook were also found in the gym on the floor. The folder and textbook were later determined to be Kendrick's. There was also blood on the wall about 50 feet away from where Kendrick was found. This blood did not belong to Kendrick, and it had been there for some time. No blood belonging to Kendrick was found outside of the mat. Investigators said that determining whose blood was on the wall would involve testing over 3,000 people in the school, and a lot of students and teachers may not even be at the school anymore. The shoes found by the bleachers showed red stains on them, and some said it looked like the sleeve of the hoodie did too. But officers did not take the hoodie and orange and black gym shoes into evidence, saying there was no blood on them. But determining which pair of shoes this actually was remains unclear. Georgia state law stipulates that the coroner be contacted immediately on the discovery of a body, but Coroner Bill Watson said he was not notified until 6 hours later. Watson also stated on his death investigation report that there was no cooperation from law enforcement at the scene, and Kendrick's body had been noticeably moved, and the scene had been compromised. On January 14th, Lowndes County authorities said that Kendrick's body showed no injuries following the preliminary autopsy. There were some marks on Kendrick's body, but these were only small and superficial abrasions. On May 2nd, Kendrick Johnson's death was officially ruled as an accident. The autopsy stated it was due to accidental positional asphyxia. Just 1 hour after this announcement was made, Kendrick's family, friends, and civil rights activists marched in protest outside the high school. They still had many questions, and the situation and findings just didn't make any sense to them. If Kendrick had become stuck inside the mats himself and this was an accident, how could not a single person have heard him call for help or seen anything when a steady stream of students and sports teams were going in and out of the gym until 8 p.m. that day? Others argue that the mats were so thick and compacted that hearing anything would have been virtually, if not completely, impossible. The family asked Reverend Floyd Rose from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference if he could conduct an independent investigation into the case. Rose, along with Lee Tuckton, a lead investigator for the SCLC and the former president of the local chapter of the NAACP, agreed to take a look. Attorney Benjamin Crump, who has represented many families in high-profile cases, including those of Michael Brown, George Floyd, and Trayvon Martin, began working with the Johnson family. C.B. King Jr. also came on board and became the family's lead attorney. It defies all logic, the rules of science, and common sense that a 17-year-old athlete would climb into a wrestling mat and get stuck, trying to get a tennis shoe and stop breathing. What's more likely is that someone rolled him up in that mat, Benjamin Crump said. The Johnsons' legal team said that the information provided by the paramedics contradicted what law enforcement had said. The paramedic report stated that Kendrick's body was partially inside the gym mats, but that his head, torso, and arms were exposed. This went against officers' claims that Kendrick's body was found upside down, completely stuck inside the mat. The paramedics' reports also noted bruising near Kendrick's right jaw, but no bruises were mentioned on the autopsy report. But the lieutenant that oversaw the investigation said bruising was likely discoloration caused by lividity, which occurs when the heart stops pumping and blood settles in the body. The family called on Dr. William R. Anderson to look into the autopsy report. Dr. Anderson had been in the field of forensic pathology for over 40 years at that point and was happy to help. From looking at the autopsy report, Anderson said that for Kendrick to die of positional asphyxiation, there would have had to have been fluid in his lungs. But the autopsy report did not cite this, and it appeared the lungs not only didn't have any fluid in them, but they were normal in every regard. Fluid in the lungs should have made the lungs heavier, but they were of a normal weight. Anderson said that this was the first red flag that caught his attention and agreed to perform a second autopsy. On June 6th, a Lands County judge granted the Johnson family permission to exhume Kendrick's body so the second autopsy could be performed. And 8 days later, the 17-year-old's body was taken from Sunset Hill Cemetery. When Kendrick's body reached Dr. Anderson, he was shocked to find that Kendrick's organs, his brain, heart, lungs, liver, and other viscera, were missing, and in their place was newspaper. The coroner said the organs were not sent to the funeral home because they were too decomposed and were destroyed through natural process beforehand. The funeral home said they received Kendrick's body without the organs, and replacing them with paper or sawdust is actually common practice while embalming. The president of the National Association of Medical Examiners, Dr. Gregory Schmunk, said he had never heard of this practice. Nonetheless, Dr. Anderson pressed on with the autopsy, looking for anything else that may have been overlooked before. The family waited patiently for him to reveal his findings. His report stated that Kendrick had died from an unexplained, apparent non-accidental blunt force trauma. Following this, the family, who had spent the last 9 months marching the streets of Valdosta demanding answers and attention to Kendrick's case, begged for his death to be investigated as a homicide. Dr. Anderson agreed and said the case needed to be reopened because Kendrick's injuries appeared to have been inflicted by another person. Anderson also claimed that federal officials had told him they agreed with his findings but could not pursue charges because there was no evidence of a civil rights violation. Anderson's theory is that there had been a fight in the gym, during which Kendrick was most likely placed in a sort of stranglehold by the person or persons who might not have to kill him. Probably happened very quickly, and they panicked, he said. In October that year, a $10,000 reward was offered by an anonymous donor to anyone with information, leading to the arrest or conviction of someone in Kendrick's case. Attorneys for the family of Kendrick called on authorities to release the surveillance videos from in and around the school, which they said was being withheld. But an attorney for Lowndes County Schools said that the Johnson family had been invited to view the surveillance tapes on several occasions. 290 hours of material from all 35 cameras inside and outside of the gym were gone through. And on October 30th, a judge ordered the release of these tapes. A day after the judge's announcement, U.S. Attorney and former politician Michael J. Moore announced that his office would open a formal review into the death of Kendrick Johnson. Over 100 people were subpoenaed as a result, and tens of thousands of emails and text messages were reviewed. However, the footage from the school's cameras raised more questions than answers for many people. There were 2 gyms at the school, and Kendrick was found in what was referred to as the old gym. It is important to note that piecing together a definitive timeline of what happened using the cameras and footage available has proven to be an immense task for the people that have reviewed this. Nonetheless, the cameras and footage have been a huge part and focus of this case. CNN secured access to the videos very early on. They hired forensic video analyst Grant Fredericks to look at the material. Fredericks' examination showed that at least an hour of video was missing from all 4 cameras inside the old gym. Each surveillance server has its own internal clock, and one server's clock may not match up to another's. The director of technology for Lowndes County Schools said that the servers do not communicate with each other to sync up their clocks. Not having that time sync capability can lead to huge differences in timings between servers. For example, when one camera captures what is happening at 12 p.m., another camera on a separate server could capture the same moment, but the timestamp shows it as 12:10 p.m. But in actuality, there is number 10-minute gap between the footage. The footage was exported from the school's 2 Integral Technology servers and 1 Toshiba's surveillance server. The footage from the Integral cameras showed approximately 36 hours of footage from the school's old gym and surrounding areas, and the surveillance cameras showed approximately 48 hours of the C-Wing and administrative office areas. Scott Forth, the senior technology technician with Lowndes County Schools, exported the footage under the supervision of detectives and gave it to investigators on an external hard drive the very afternoon Kendrick was found. Fredericks was able to find Kendrick on camera entering the school early in the morning, and he last saw him at 1:09 p.m., walking into the old gym. However, because of the incorrect timestamps, this is not accurate. Although Kendrick was spotted entering the gym at 1:0:9, the more reliable timestamp on the footage places Kendrick going in at 1:28 p.m. The Integral server is over 20 minutes behind the footage. The Valdosta Daily Times also reviewed the footage in great depth, and their research showed an awful lot. Although the timestamps were not in sync, there is no discrepancy in Kendrick's route to the gym. The surveillance footage shows Kendrick entering the C-Wing near the school's foreign language classrooms at 1:25 p.m. He is walking by himself and carrying the yellow folder that would later be found near his body. He turns the corner near the B-Wing stairs and continues to walk down the hallway in front of the guidance and administration officers. He doesn't stop to talk to anyone. No one appears to be following him, and he does not appear to be following anyone himself. The last timestamp video of Kendrick shows him opening the doors to the hallway that leads to the old gym at 1:28 p.m. The rest of Kendrick's walk was picked up by the 2 separate Integral surveillance servers. These videos do not contain timestamps, but the footage can be matched to the image stills from the case file that were printed from the surveillance system. There does appear to be an almost 10-minute gap between a still image from the case file that shows Kendrick outside the door to the old gym at 12:59 p.m. and another still image that shows him inside the gym at 1:09 p.m. This was the time that the forensic video analyst Grant Fredericks saw. But it appears that this record, a student that moves across the camera's field of view, can trigger the camera to record. But not always. The camera breaks each image into blocks and measures the number of blocks that change at any given moment. A certain percentage of blocks has to change before the camera starts to record. If a student walks directly in front of the camera, more blocks are changed because the student is occupying more of the image. If a student is further away, the number of blocks changed may not hit the threshold to trigger the camera to start recording, according to Integral Technologies documents. This explained why some students in the footage appeared to vanish without reason and may have made it seem that the footage had been altered. What nobody was able to find, however, was any video showing what happened inside the old gym on any timestamp on any camera at any point. The old gym's cameras were positioned in an area where the resting mats were not visible, so there is no footage that captures Kendrick entering the mat and no footage that can definitively say how he died. There is also no footage that shows him leaving the gym at any point, but we know from the attendance records that Kendrick never made it to his 4th period class and was marked as absent. Since the initial export of the footage, the servers containing the raw video data have been locked in a vault. The only time they have been removed was at the request of the Johnson family. The family's attorney, C.B. King, requested the images that showed Kendrick in the old gym, and those images were given to the family. The servers were then placed back into the vault. C.B. King said, "We don't have any time code with which to synchronize the events that are shown in the video. Either the cameras did this on their own or a human being interacted to make these cameras do these things. The fact that this particular camera, out of all the others, is out of focus, that this is not positioned in such a way that you get any images showing the top edge of the mat, we believe is anything but a coincidence." In regards to the time code on the videos, Scott Forth, who exported the footage, said that the way the software works is it allows image stills to be created and printed with timestamps, but does not allow video to be exported with timestamps. Lee Tuckton and Reverend Floyd Rose, who had been enlisted by the family to into the case, ultimately determined that they found allegations of a cover-up to be unfounded. "When this thing all started, I really thought there was something to it," Rose said. "Either he wasn't murdered, or whoever did it was so powerful that they were able to hide him and cover up and have all these people lie. If this was the 60s and you asked me that and it was Valdosta, Georgia, I would say, well, maybe, but I just don't believe that. Nobody has convinced me of that. Saturday, January 11th, 2014 marked the 1-year anniversary of Kendrick being found. Protests, rallies, and town meetings had been held regularly, with the community coming together to take part and listen to people, such as Reverend Al Sharpton, talk about the case. At the end of January, the $10,000 reward offered up was rescinded, as it was only good for 90 days after it was first offered. The legal battles continued for the Johnson family, and in February, they sued the Harrington Funeral Home, the funeral home that held Kendrick, accusing them of negligence and fraud. They said that the funeral home had not been honest with them about Kendrick's body and his organs being missing, and his body being stuffed with newspaper. But the case against the funeral home was eventually dropped, and an investigation found they didn't violate any rules. This did raise questions about the findings of the second autopsy. Dr. Anderson stated that to die of positional asphyxiation, there would have had to have been fluid in his lungs, which wasn't stated on the first autopsy. But Kendrick's organs, including his lungs, were removed by the time the second autopsy took place. This meant that they were impossible to analyze for a second time to either confirm or dispute the findings of the first autopsy. A month later, an anonymous email was sent. The email detailed an alleged confession of an ex-classmate killing Kendrick and implicating 4 people in total. But upon looking into it, the sheriff's office ultimately deemed this confession to be based on rumors and hearsay, deeming it baseless. For months after this, the Johnson family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Lowndes Board of Education, its superintendent, and the principal of the school. The suit alleged that Kendrick was violently assaulted, severely injured, suffered great physical pain and mental anguish, and subjected to insults and loss of life. The lawsuit also alleged that the school were negligent and violated Kendrick's constitutional right to equal protection based on race. It stated that the school board did not properly investigate previous incidents involving altercations between Kendrick and other students, stating Kendrick had been repeatedly harassed and attacked. Shortly after this, 7 members of the Johnson family, including Kenneth and Jacqueline, were found guilty of obstruction following a trial when they blocked people from entering the Lowndes County Judicial Complex during a protest back in 2013. They were sentenced to a suspended 1 year in jail, and no further action would be taken as long as no further arrests were made within a year, which they were not. Kendrick's parents then filed a $100 million lawsuit. The lawsuit named 38 defendants, including a local FBI agent called Rick Bell, his 2 sons, Brian and Brandon, who were classmates of Kendrick and other students. Also accused were several officials with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the Valdosta Police Department, the City of Valdosta, the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department, and the Lowndes County School District, all of whom the family alleged conspired to cover up their son's murder. The suit alleged FBI agent Rick encouraged his 2 sons Brian and Brandon to attack Kendrick with the help of another schoolmate and an unnamed John Doe and Jane Doe. The lawsuit stated that Jane Doe induced Kendrick to enter the gymnasium, where he was then met by the 2 brothers and another student, who fatally beat him and placed him in the gym mat. The brothers, Kendrick's mother claimed, had been harassing her son previously, and she had reported this to the school before. According to Jacqueline, Kendrick phoned her as he got off the school bus on the way to a game one day. He told her that he and Brian had had an altercation on the bus. Kendrick's friends said that Brian had been playing around but was being rough, and Brian grabbed Kendrick's dreadlocks and pushed his head down. A fight escalated, and after this, Kendrick was driven home in the deputy's car, while Brian stayed to watch the game with his parents. Federal investigators felt there was enough to look into these claims and seized the brothers' phones and computers. They also seized the electronics belonging to the brothers' parents and one of the brothers' girlfriends. Video footage from the school showed one of the brothers walking around with what many speculated was blood on his upper right arm, but he explained that this was simply a logo. Video surveillance appeared to show that neither of the Bell could be seen entering or exiting the gym at any pertinent time. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Department maintained at least one of the brothers was not on campus when Kendrick was last seen alive, and the other was in another part of the building. The brothers themselves said they were good friends with Kendrick and had absolutely nothing to do with his death. Brian said he did not see Kendrick on the school campus at all that day. But a 2021 review of the case, a documentary entitled Finding Kendrick Johnson, uncovered a once heavily redacted and missing FBI report. We haven't inserted any images of said report in this video, out of respect for the people that put 4 years worth of work into the documentary and finding the report, but we will it for the sake of giving all the context and information possible. If you are interested in viewing it, we highly recommend and encourage everyone watch the documentary themselves. The report in part shows various stills of video footage from the day Kendrick died. Once heavily redacted, the now unredacted version appears to clearly show Brian Bell walking alongside Kendrick in the school. And according to the documentary, the images in the reports can trace both the brothers on campus that day. Another page of the report gives descriptions of the images shown and is also cited. In relation to the image of Kendrick and Brian in the same frame, it actually names them both as being the people in the image. This contradicts what the brothers say and what law enforcement have said happened that day and what was on the footage. Jim Elliott, the Lowndes County attorney, said the allegations made about the brothers were unfounded and baseless. In a deposition, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson admitted under oath that they didn't have any evidence that directly implicated the Bell brothers in Kendrick's death, but that they believed they had something to do with what happened to him. Ebony magazine had previously run several articles about Kendrick's death, and they had used pseudonyms to talk about Brian and Brandon. Many people argued that although the brothers weren't named, it was very clear who was being spoken about in the articles. Brian Bell's Florida State University sports scholarship offer was revoked following this, and the parents of Brian and Brandon subsequently filed a $5 million slander and libel lawsuit in federal court against the publisher of Ebony magazine and the writer, Frederick Rosen. No law enforcement official has ever named either of the Bell brothers as suspects in the death of Kendrick, and no charges against them have ever been filed. Attorney Michael J. Moore, who had vowed to take on the case, resigned in 2015. All his cases went to his successor except Kendrick's. Kendrick was transferred to the Northern District of Ohio under another U.S. attorney. Shortly after receiving Kendrick's case, this attorney also resigned. Despite the resignations, the Department of Justice investigation continued looking into Kendrick's case. The May 23, 2015 marked the Lowndes County School graduation and the year that Kendrick Johnson should have graduated himself alongside his classmates. Protesters lined up in front of the school in support of Kendrick and his family, and the family revealed despite their requests, the school had refused to have Kendrick's memory honored during the event. In March 2016, Kendrick's parents withdrew the $100 million wrongful death lawsuit. The Johnson family were then subsequently ordered to pay up to $851,000 in attorney's fees and were sued for more than $1 million in defamation charges. Judge Richard Porter said their claims were substantially frivolous, substantially groundless, or substantially vexatious. The family appealed this, but their appeal was dismissed. Later that year, a Kendrick Johnson supporter named Bobby Worthy filed a complaint with the FBI in Valdosta and the Judicial Qualifications Commission. The complaint alleged that Judge Porter fell asleep at least 6 times throughout the various trial dates and showed favoritism to the 8 white defense attorneys. Soon after this, Benjamin Crump, who had been working closely with the Johnson family since the start, stepped down. In a letter, Crump informed Jacqueline and Kenneth that his firm would be unable to continue its legal representation in coordination with their lead attorney, C.B. King Jr. In June 2016, the Department of Justice announced that the independent federal investigation into Kendrick's death found insufficient evidence to support criminal charges. They said, after extensive investigation into this tragic event, federal investigators determined that there is insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone or some group of people willfully violated Kendrick Johnson's civil rights or committed any other prosecutable federal crime. In the 2021 documentary Finding Kendrick Johnson, Kenneth Johnson said that during a meeting, the Department of Justice said the shoe under Kendrick's head was planted there. Another lawsuit was filed by the Johnson family. It named some of the claims in the previous suits and had a total of 41 defendants. In June 2017, this lawsuit was dismissed without prejudice. A month later, the the Johnson family filed their third lawsuit in the Superior Court of Bibb County. The defendants listed ranged from Lowndes County officials to former classmates of Kendrick. In January 2018, Kendrick's family filed to have his body exhumed for a third time, and another autopsy was set to take place. It would be performed again by Dr. William Anderson. Kendrick's dad, Kenneth, said the family did not want to have to do this, but they were still desperately searching for the truth. 10 months later, the third autopsy results were in, and they showed non-accidental blunt force trauma to Kendrick's right neck and right thorax. Anderson sent his findings to two other pathologists who both confirmed the same as what he had thought and agreed with what he had found. Following this, the Johnson family felt evidence pointing to a homicide was now more than overwhelming, and it needed to be presented to a jury. "My family won't be satisfied until someone is behind bars and someone is convicted for what happened," said Kenneth. Going over it with common sense, how can it be an accident? In April 2019, Sheriff Ashley Polk wrote a letter to federal prosecutors saying that he had met with Kenneth and a captain in the sheriff's office. All three of them agreed that it was vitally important they receive any unreleased files relating to the federal investigation. Federal prosecutors told him he could have the case file, which Polk described as 17 filing cabinets worth of records, computer towers, and hard drives. Sheriff Polk said this file was the final missing piece he needed to give the case a full and complete examination. "It's going to be a lot of work, but I think the people deserve it," he said. "I think the family deserves it." In June 2020, an online petition was started in regards to reopening Kendrick's case, which gained huge traction very quickly. Kendrick's case was officially reopened in March 2021. Sheriff Polk stated that he was not claiming there was something wrong with the original investigation or the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong. He said, "I've never told anybody what I believe about this case, whether it was accidental or murder. I would never say that until I could see all the evidence. If it was an accident, it's a very, very unusual way for something to happen." A week after the case was reopened, some possible new evidence was presented. A 25-second recording, which was sold to the Johnson family for $1,000, appeared to depict an alleged confession. The tape had been secretly recorded a week prior, but 2 months later, this turned out to be nothing more than a cruel and heartless hoax. Kendrick's case is now officially open once more and being looked into again. Sheriff Polk said, "We're starting fresh, so it's like a brand new investigation. I'm going to try and dispel all the rumors and accusations. I just want the truth. That's all I want." Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Li Jingzhe resided in Xi'an, China, with her husband Mao Shunping. Their son, Maoyin, affectionately known as Siza, was born on February 23, 1986. Siza was a contented infant who seldom cried and developed into a clever and well-behaved toddler, endearing himself to everyone around him. Jingzhe worked in a grain exporting company, which required her to travel to rural areas for several days during harvest season to negotiate with suppliers, leaving her son under his father's care at home. She was on one of those trips in 1988 when she received a telegram from her employer. "Emergency at home. Return right away," it read. On October 17th, Mao Zedong had gone to pick up 2.5-year-old Jia Zha after he finished work for the day. While they were on their way home, the little boy became thirsty, so they stopped at a small hotel owned by their family. Zhuzhong was out of his father's sight for just a few seconds while he went to get cool water. During those few seconds, Zha vanished. Jingzhe immediately returned home to Xi'an, where her boss informed her of her son's disappearance. She initially assumed that her son had wandered off and gotten lost and expected that someone would find him and bring him to a police station. When a week passed without any sign of him, she began to realize that something more neighborhood where he went missing and printed and distributed 100,000 neighborhood where he went missing and printed and distributed 100,000 flyers in train and bus stations. She took out advertisements in the paper and eventually traveled to 10 different provinces to follow up on leads about her son's whereabouts. Jia Zha and Jinpeng were devastated by their son's disappearance and could think of nothing else besides their search for him. Their fixation on their investigation ultimately took a toll on their marriage, and they divorced 4 years after Jia Zha went missing. Zha continued searching for her son and eventually began helping other parents of missing children as well. She became a part of a network of such parents who sent each other bundles of missing persons flyers to post in their area. Eventually, the network covered most of China. By 1999, she was appearing on Chinese television programs raising awareness about missing children, and in 2007, she began volunteering with Baby Come Home, an organization that helps locate children who have gone missing. Through the organization, Jia Zha has helped reunite 29 families with their missing child. She was still without closure to her own case, however. Jia Zha's mother passed away at the age of 94 in 2015 on Jia Zha's birthday. Just prior to her death, she had a dream that her grandson was found and finally came home. In April of 2020, police received a tip about a man in the Sichuan province who had paid to adopt a boy in the late 1980s. They then used an image of Jia Zha as a child to help develop one of what he might look like as an adult. Using facial recognition software, they ran the image through a national database of photos and found a possible match in a man living in Chengdu City in Sichuan province, the same province named by their informant. The man agreed to take a DNA test, which showed that he was Ginger's son. On Mother's Day of 2020, she received a phone call. After almost 32 years and personally following up on over 300 leads, she would finally be reunited with her child. Jia had been sold to a childless couple in the Sichuan province for roughly $850 in today's US money. He grew up in Chengdu City with the new name of Gu Ningning. In 2020, the 34-year-old was married and had his own interior design business. He had previously seen Jingxia on national television advocating for missing children and was impressed by her dedication and kindness. When she showed a picture of her own missing son, he thought that it looked like pictures of him as a child, but it did not occur to him that he could actually be the missing boy. After a second DNA test confirmed that Gu Ningning really was Mao Yan, a date was set for his reunion with his birth parents. On May 18, 2020, he was reunited with them at a news conference in Xi'an. Jia Zha spent a month in Xi'an, splitting time between the homes of his mother and father. He has no memory of his life prior to living with his adoptive parents and had hoped that being in Xi'an and seeing old photographs would help him remember his life with his birth parents. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and no memories of his time with them have resurfaced. Xiaojia has returned to his home in Chengdu. While Qingxia still lives in Xi'an, 450 miles away, she now communicates with her son every day. She has vowed to continue working for the families of missing children and help them get the happy ending she has finally found. Robert Hutton grew up in Lancaster, California with his older sister, Edith. In 1971, Robert decided to embark on a cross-country adventure with Edith, her husband, and their newborn baby. They planned to live out of a pickup truck and find temporary work to support their travels along the way. The group eventually reached Colorado, and Robert decided to stay there rather than continue on with his sister and brother-in-law. For a while, Robert remained in contact with his family, making collect calls to his parents back home. He ended up leaving Colorado, leading a transient lifestyle as he looked for work around the country. The last anyone in his family heard from him, he had been in New York, but was hitchhiking his way back to California. Robert's calls stopped, however, and the 21-year-old was reported missing by the end of 1972. Robert's mother was the main force driving investigation into her son's disappearance for years. She looked at her old phone bills to identify the locations Robert had called her from and got into contact with authorities in those areas to try to get their help. After years without any sign of Robert, she came to the conclusion that he must be dead, a conclusion which broke her heart. She died in 1989, never knowing what became of her son. Edith took over the responsibility of looking for her brother. By the late 1990s, she had the benefit of the internet for her search. Using internet databases and online phone books, she found almost 400 individuals named Robert or Bob Hutton. She sent a homemade postcard to each one of them explaining that she was searching for her brother and wondering if he was him. None of them were. Edith then began researching unidentified bodies found all across the country in case her mother had been correct and her brother had been killed. Eventually, she found 6 sets of unidentified remains she believed could have been Robert. She reached out to the law enforcement agencies handling each of the cases but only got one reply from Jason Moran, a detective with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. In October of 2011, Cook County Sheriff Thomas Dart announced that his office was launching a renewed effort to identify 8 young men killed by infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy, was convicted of the murders of 33 young men and boys whose bodies were found on his property or in a nearby river, but only 25 of their identities were known. DNA samples had been taken from each of the unknown victims, and Sheriff Dart asked that relatives of men who disappeared in the 1970s submit their DNA for comparison. Robert had gone missing the same year as Gacy's first known killing and, as a young white male, was consistent with Gacy's other victims. Robert's path from New York to California was unknown, so the possibility that he had passed through Chicago on his way could not be dismissed. He also often supported himself by working in construction, and one of the ruses Gacy used to get young men to come to his house was to offer them work with his construction company, EDM Contractors. Based on these facts, Detective Moran did follow up on the possibility that Robert was one of his unidentified victims. However, using police databases that Edith did not have access to, he was able to find a record of Robert living in Breckenridge, Colorado up until recently. His current whereabouts, however, were unknown. Since this information eliminated Robert as one of the unidentified young men, it should have ended Detective Moran's involvement in his disappearance. However, the detective was moved by the story of Robert's mother dying without knowing what became of him, Edith's years of working trying to locate him, and the fact that Robert's father had recently battled cancer. He therefore did not forget about the case, and in 2013, he decided to look for Robert in law enforcement databases again. When he did, he found a current address for him in the small town of Stevensville, Montana. He reached out to the sheriff's department there, and an officer went to the address and confirmed that the man living there was the right Robert Hutton and obtained his permission to release his phone number to his family. In April, Detective Moran called Edith to inform her that after more than 40 years, she could speak with her younger brother. Robert had spent the first several years after his last contact with his family in the Southwest, hiking and caving in remote areas. He had no fixed address or means to contact anyone. He had also gotten involved with drugs during this time. By the time he tried to contact his family after a few years, their contact information was no longer current. He returned to California to visit them after he got off of drugs, but the family had moved away by then. Robert settled in Colorado in the early 80s, eventually starting his own construction company. He thought of his family fondly and made a small, unsuccessful effort to find them in the early 90s. After the economic downturn of 2008, he had trouble finding work. He had moved to Montana in 2011 because some of his friends had previously moved there. He found odd jobs remodeling homes and building barns and was eventually able to purchase a trailer to live in, which provided him with the address Detective Moran had found in the database. In 2013, he was working in an ammunition factory. He was shocked to hear that his family still cared about him and that they had been working so hard to find him. The day Robert was contacted by law enforcement, he spoke to his sister on the phone for the first time. He would continue to speak with her and their father on a weekly, however. Their father and stepmother were able to travel to Montana twice in 2013 to see Robert. In 2015, Robert moved to Nevada to live near Edith and see her almost every day. 2 out of the 8 victims of John Wayne Gacy Detective Moran set out to identify have since been identified through DNA. In addition to Robert's case, Detective Moran has also solved 10 other cold cases that ended up having no connection to Gacy. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. Ricardas Pušiš was born and raised in Lithuania, but was living in the United Kingdom by 2015. He was working for the Nylayer Leak Company in Sutera and living in Wisbech. The last confirmed sighting of him was on September 26th, 2015, when he was leaving work for the day, although there was a potential sighting of him with a group of Lithuanian men later that evening. Ricardas failed to show up when he was due back at work on the 28th, which was out of character. His disappearance was taken seriously from the start because concern about his safety had been raised just a month before he vanished. While they were conducting routine welfare checks in Wisbech, police officers encountered a local resident who told them that Ricardas had recently been forced to move because he was being exploited. Police have described Ricardas as the type of character that was vulnerable to exploitation because of his circumstances. He had very little money, living paycheck to paycheck, and had no family in the area. His mother still lived in Lithuania, his sister lived in Germany, and he had cousins living in Ireland. He did not have a vehicle and spoke very little English, mainly interacting with local Lithuanian community. When the officers found Ricardas at his new address, however, he assured them that he was fine. When he went missing, this previous incident raised concerns that he may have been taken to be used for forced labor. On November 17th, Ricardas's identification card was found in a park in Wisbech near Cannon Street. The following month, a 31-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murdering Ricardas despite the fact that his body had not been located. The man was ultimately released due to lack of evidence. The next major development in the case would not come until August of 2018, when police learned that a Facebook profile using Ricardas's name had been created. His relatives confirmed that the pictures were of Ricardas, although it was unclear when they were taken. They also tried contacting the person who made the profile, but they would only rarely get replies to their messages. When they did get responses, they would come long after their initial message and were generally very vague. One cousin did say that they received a message from the account that contained details about their last meeting with Ricardas that Ricardas would have known. Police also tried to make contact through their profile, but all of their messages went unanswered. They could not reach anyone using the phone number associated with the account or trace its owner. They tried to trace where the account being accessed from but could not pinpoint an exact location, although the account appeared to be accessed in the greater Wisbech area. The existence of the Facebook profile and the possibility that Ricardas was still alive was not announced to the public for over a year out of concerns for Ricardas' safety. In November of 2019, it was made public as part of a renewed appeal for information in the case. When launching the appeal, Detective Chief Inspector Adam Gallup said that despite the Facebook profile, the disappearance was unlikely to be a case of deliberate absence, and that while Ricardas may still be alive and being exploited for labor, the case was still being treated as a murder investigation. In the following weeks, potential sightings of Ricardas in the Wisbech and Kings Lynn areas were called in, but Ricardas remained missing. In late June of 2020, police received new information in the case, and on July 1st, almost 5 years after he disappeared, Ricardas was finally found during a search of a wooded area in Harecraft Road. He had been living amongst the undergrowth in a primitive shelter which kept him well hidden and had not interacted with any other person in quite a while. Police did not immediately announce that Ricardas had been found, again out of concern for his safety. In the statement they ultimately released on August 3rd, the Kingfisher Constabulary announced that, "We now believe Ricardas made the decision to run away as he had been the victim of a crime, having previously been subject to exploitation." Given these circumstances, they waited a month to make the announcement so that they could be sure that the safeguards needed to keep Ricardas protected were in place. They are also helping him find resources to cope with the stresses associated with living under such difficult circumstances, away from human contact, for so long. An investigation into who may have exploited Ricardas, potentially for forced labor, has been launched. Erica Lloyd, 37 years old, resided in Walnut Creek, California, sharing a home with a roommate, her 2 pet rabbits, and her 12-year-old son. Described by her family as kind, fun-loving, and capable of building rapport with anyone, Erica, like many, grappled with the challenges brought on by the 2020 lockdown. As a hairstylist, she faced financial strain due to the inability to work, adding to the stress of effectively homeschooling her son during this period. In June of 2020, she therefore decided to go on a trip to Joshua Tree National Park, 7 hours away from her home. She hoped the time in the outdoors would help relieve some of the stress she had been feeling for the past 3 months. Erica left for her trip on Sunday, June 14th. Authorities would later be able to confirm that she entered the park and was seen there alone. However, 2 days later, on June 16th, Erica stopped communicating with her family. That same day, California Highway Patrol found Erica's black Honda Accord near the intersection of Shelton Road and Highway 62 near 29 Palms. The car was facing south as though Erica had been driving back to the national park, which was not very far away. The car had been vandalized with the front and back windshields, as well as the radio, smashed in. However, there were also signs that the disabled vehicle had been in an accident. The airbag had deployed and there was damage to the car's undercarriage. According to the owners of the towing company who came to tow the car away, the radiator and the AC condenser had been smashed backwards as though the car had hit an object. They theorized that the car may have hit the berm of the road straight on. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department does not believe there were any signs of foul play at the scene where the car was found. A massive air and ground search was launched for Erica. All-terrain search dogs were brought in. Erica's camping equipment was located at a campsite at the Jumbo Rocks campground. Cave and mine expert Doug Billings has volunteered his services to the effort. In 2014, Billings helped locate the body of a 19-year named Aaron Corwin in a mine not far from Joshua Tree. In addition to searching for Erica, he is keeping meticulous track of what areas have been searched for her. During the course of his investigation, Billings found a witness who saw a woman matching Erica's description walking along Highway 62 with another person a week after her disappearance. But this sighting has not been confirmed to be of Erica. It is conceivable that Erica could have walked to Highway 62 looking for help after her car was damaged and the wrong individual stopped to help her. Her family is also concerned that she may have become disoriented or suffered memory loss after suffering the impact of the airbag deploying during the accident. If she wandered off in a state of confusion, it could have been difficult for her to find her way back to the road. As of the end of July 2020, they held on to the possibility that someone may have found Erica, still confused and disoriented, and taken her in. Erica's parents live in Maryland but have traveled to California twice since Erica vanished to help look for her. They are appreciative of the kindness the local community has shown them and their willingness to talk about the case and put up the flyers they have been distributing in the windows of their businesses. Erica's son misses his mother and regularly asks his grandparents about their efforts, making sure they are still making phone calls and talking to people about his mom in hopes that she will be found. Dedric Foster could seemingly make friends with just about anyone he met. He was outgoing and compassionate and therefore had a wide and diverse group of friends. He was quick to help out his family and friends, particularly when he could do so by cooking or baking for them. He was a joy to be around and to make others laugh. He was a good listener who was always there for people who needed to talk, but also a very clear communicator who could easily express himself about the things he was passionate about. Dedric had previously worked as a corrections officer and was able to combine his love of travel with his career history and worked mainly as a traveling crisis or tactical private security officer. In 2020, he, like many people, was in between jobs because of virus-related shutdowns and travel restrictions. He had found a new position at FedEx and was due to start work there in April. While Dedric loved his whole family, his 2 daughters, ages 5 and 13, were the center of his world. He and their mother, Jordan, were divorced but maintained a good relationship. Jordan and the girls lived in Kansas City, whereas Dedric lived in Independence, Kansas, but he was still an active part of their lives. Jordan last heard from Dedric on April 4, 2020. He called to tell her that his prepaid cell phone would be shut off in the next few days, but he would have a new phone soon. This was a perfectly normal conversation as Dedric and Jordan spoke on the phone regularly, and he was always sure to let someone know where he would be or how to contact him. Jordan was concerned, therefore, when her normal communications with her ex-husband did not resume after a few days. She became alarmed when he did not call her on Mother's Day, May 10th. Dedric would call Jordan his twin sister and his mother every Mother's Day without fail. He was very close with his mother, so even if he had to skip the other 2 calls for some reason, nothing could have stopped him from calling her. While all of the people Dedric was close to had been concerned by the fact that they were not hearing from him, no one realized that no one had heard from him until Mother's Day when they began reaching out to each other when he failed to make his customary calls. While Dedric would see his loved ones when he could, they were spread out. Most of his family lived in Parsons, Kansas, while he was in Independence and Jordan, and the girls were in Kansas City. This meant that his family and friends were not necessarily alarmed when they had not seen him in person in a few weeks. The family then went to the police in Independence to report Dedric missing. The police have identified the last known sighting of Dedric as being in Independence on April 12th. Dedric's family distributed and hung flyers throughout the area with Dedric's picture and information. However, many of the flyers hung in Independence were removed, leading to concerns that someone in the town may have been connected to his disappearance, but no motive for anyone to want to harm Dedric has been identified. The Independence Police Department has not been able to publicly speak about their investigation due to its ongoing nature, but say that it is a top priority. Dedric's family believes that they are working hard on the case and appreciate their efforts. Since he disappeared, Dedric has missed both of his daughter's birthdays and his twin sister's 38th birthday. In addition to his traditional calls on Mother's Day, he missed his normal call to his father on Father's Day. Of course, it is emotionally painful, especially given that Father's Day was Sunday and I couldn't get a call from him, and his daughters couldn't call him. His father, Philip Townsend, told the Parsons Sun in June. It's taxing in that nature. Anytime you can't get closure to something. That void, it's just there. Someone knows something. My great day will be them getting closure to this. Dedric knows that his family loves him. Dedric Foster was a loving father of 2 daughters who lived in Independence, Kansas. He did not live in the same town as most of his loved ones. His ex-wife and daughters live in Kansas City, and the majority of his family live in Parsons, Kansas. He was also in the process of getting a new phone, which resulted in there being a period of a few days where he was out of contact in April of 2020. He remained out of contact beyond those few days, but no one in his family realized that he had been out of contact with all of them until Dedric failed to make his customary calls to his ex-wife, sister, and mother on Mother's Day. He was then reported missing. The last sighting of Dedric authorities have been able to confirm occurred on April 12, 2020 in Independence. Since he has been missing, Dedric has missed the birthdays of both of his daughters, Father's Day, and his twin sister's 30th birthday. His disappearance is being investigated by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Independence Police Department. On September 4, 2020, Kansas Governor Laura Kelly signed an executive order offering a $5,000 reward in Dedric's case. In a September 9th press release announcing the reward, the KBI stated that they and the Independence Police Department are treating the case like homicide based on the information they have uncovered during the course of their investigation. Due to the ongoing nature of the investigation, they cannot disclose what that information is to the public. Governor Kelly also referred to Dedric's case as a likely murder in her executive order, which also recognized that the investigators have dedicated over 1,000 hours to the investigation and followed up on almost 90 different leads in the case. 29-year-old Lauren DiMolo lived in Cape Coral, Florida, where she shared an apartment with her boyfriend, Gabriel, on Coronado Parkway. Gabriel would be the last known person to see her, and the apartment would be the last place she would be seen. According to Gabriel, Lauren was still sleeping when he left for work shortly after 6 a.m. on Friday, June 19, 2020. When he returned home that evening, Lauren was not in the apartment, but her cell phone was. She would not normally leave home without it. Gabriel then called Lauren's father, Paul, in California to tell him Lauren was not at home as expected. Paul was immediately concerned, and his worry increased throughout the weekend. On Sunday 21st, Lauren did not call him for Father's Day, which was something she had previously never failed to do. Gabriel reported her missing that day. Her case was not assigned until Wednesday 24th due to a clerical error. When the formal investigation began and police realized the circumstances of the case, Lauren was reclassified from a missing adult to a missing endangered adult. Lauren's family did not wait for police involvement to look for her. Her father flew in from California, and her sister and mother went to Lauren's apartment from their homes in Florida. They began physically searching for Lauren, going door to door asking for information and distributing flyers. For Freedom's Park, a half a mile away from Lauren's home, has played a major part in her case from the beginning. Lauren visited the park regularly and liked to meditate there. On June 19th, the same day Lauren disappeared, someone found her purse left at the park. On July 2nd, Lauren's boyfriend Gabriel and her sister Cassie were searching the park when they found a burgundy shirt in the sand near the water. They believe that the shirt belongs to Lauren as it matches one Lauren regularly wore. The concerning aspect of this discovery is that the park had been searched multiple times since Lauren went missing. The shirt was taken into evidence by police. Lauren's family is adamant that she would not have voluntarily disappeared. The main reason they can be so sure is Lauren's daughter, who turned 6 2 months after Lauren's disappearance and was the center of Lauren's universe. Lauren also did not have access to a car or any money with her when she went missing. She had recently lost her job due to the economic impact of the pandemic, but was still owed one more paycheck, which she never picked up. Surveillance footage also shows her applying for jobs on June 18th, the day before she went missing. As the police investigation continues, Lauren's family also continues their own efforts to find her. Southwest Florida Crime Stoppers is currently offering an $8,000 reward for information in the case. Tia Christine Sharp was born on June 30th, 2000, to Stephen and Natalie. Her parents separated when she was a baby, but despite this, Tia grew up in a closely knit family in Croydon, South London. She shared a particularly strong and affectionate bond with her maternal grandmother, Christine. Natalie describes their relationship as not just familial but also friendly, emphasizing their tight-knit bond as a family unit of 3. The close bond continues as Tia grows up, with Christine saying Tia would occasionally call her mom. "I wouldn't bat an eyelid," Christine said. The love that Natalie had for Tia was reciprocated as Tia adored her mother in return, and the pair were inseparable. Tia saw her father every holiday until the relationship between Stephen and Natalie soured. As she entered secondary school, Tia was confident, happy, and never afraid to voice her opinion and have herself be heard. She was feisty and brave, with her mom saying she was often the loudest in the room. In 2002, Christine was working as a barmaid in a pub in Rains Park, southwest London. It was here that she met a man named Stuart Hazel. He was 10 years her junior, and they started a relationship in 2007 with Stuart moving into her home in New Addington. Natalie had had a fling with Hazel before he began seeing her mother. He shared a good bond with Tia and she called him Granddad, as did Tia's 2 younger brothers. Although she achieved good grades in school and was popular with her teachers, her attendance was an issue. In 2008, social services became concerned with Natalie and her partner using cannabis, and therefore became involved with the family. A report issued by social services said that while there was no neglect or abuse towards Tia, the family and family dynamic was dysfunctional. After carrying out a probe into Tia's chaotic home life, social workers concluded in November 2011 that no further assessment would be needed. Instead, it was decided that T at school should be asked to keep an eye on her and report any concerns. T would regularly spend the night with Christine and Stuart. Even when Christine had to work a night shift, she would stay there with her step-grandfather. In June 2012, T was celebrating her birthday with her mother and grandmother. She had the option to bring a friend along for the celebrations, and she chose Stuart, illustrating how close she was to him. August 2012. Unbeknownst to Natalie, Tia had messaged her grandmother and Stuart, asking if it was okay if she stayed there for a couple of days. Stuart sent a text message to Natalie saying that Tia was welcome to stay. Christine wouldn't be there, but she could still stay if she wanted to. Tia was excited to go. She ran to kiss her mother goodbye and then set off to her grandmother's house. Thursday, August 2nd. Stuart meets Tia as she gets off the tram at 4:50 p.m., and CCTV follows them as they go shopping in New Addington. Later that night, Christine called the house and spoke to Stuart asking if everything was okay, and he confirmed it was, and they were playing on the PlayStation together. The following day, Friday, August 3rd, Christine returned home from work, and Stuart told her that Tia had gone into Croydon to buy some new shoes, 5 miles away in the Wick Gift Center. By 6 o'clock that night, she still hadn't returned home, so Christine phoned Natalie, who confirmed she hadn't seen her either. They tried contacting her via text message and Facebook, but heard nothing back. They decided to go driving around the area to see if they could spot her, hoping perhaps the public transport was running late and that was causing a delay. By 10 o'clock and with still no sign, Christine Stewart and Natalie headed to the police station to report her as missing. Stewart told the investigators that he had seen Tia around midday before she headed into Croydon to go shopping. A phone call from a neighbor also suggested that they had seen her leaving the property. They searched the house where she had been staying with her grandmother and Stewart, but no trace of her was found. As she clearly wasn't in the house, the police widened their investigation to the local area. The story of the missing 12-year-old spreads like wildfire, with major news outlets picking up on the story. Stuart Hazel was seen leading one of the searches. Police said that she had only taken a small amount of money with her and did not take her travel card or her mobile phone, adding that this was very out of character for her. Area Commander Neil Bissu stressed the investigation was still a missing persons inquiry and did not suggest there were any suspects in the case. The family were absolutely distraught. Natalie told a local news outlet, "We all feel terrible. We think she's been taken, but we just don't know. There's no CCTV. We know absolutely nothing. I wish to God I could tell you something. My baby girl walked out and she vanished." On August 7th, a press conference was held. DCI Nick Scola gave the press and public a description of the missing Tia. Tia's uncle David Sharp also made an appeal, begging for her to come home. There were 55 different sightings reported by members of the public, but the police weren't able to substantiate any of them. As Stuart Hazel was the last person to see Tia alive, he felt as if that made him a potential suspect, and so contacted ITV to give an interview and clear his name. On August 9th, he gave an interview to Mark Williams Thomas, an investigative journalist and former police officer for ITV News, denying that he had anything to do with the disappearance of his step-granddaughter. In the middle of his interview, Christine came home, and Hazel removed his microphone to pause the interview and offer her comfort. As there was still no sign of Tia, the police decided to conduct another search of the house, this time with the assistance of police dogs, but still, no trace of Tia was found. A week after she had been reported missing on Friday, August 10th, and a day after he had given the interview with ITV, Stuart Hazel got up early and left the house. When Christine later woke up, she smelt something in her house, but couldn't locate where it was coming from. When the police arrived, they asked her to leave the house immediately so they could conduct another search. That afternoon, a fourth and final search was conducted of the house in New Addington. In the attic, they found a body. Due to the heat and the fact the body had been wrapped up and stored in the attic, the body had decomposed to the point where the person was visually unidentifiable. Croydon Central MP Gavin Barwell said, "The police have yet to formally confirm that the body is Tia's, yet this devastating development will come as a huge blow to her family and the community in New Addington, all of whom have worked tirelessly to try and find her over the past week." A post-mortem on the body began the same day the discovery had been made, August 10th, and was paused later that day. By August 16th, the post-mortem still had not been completed. However, at an inquest into the death which opened that day, it was confirmed that the body was that of Tia Sharp. Due to the state of decomposition, dental records had to be used to identify her. The post-mortem was later concluded without establishing a cause of death. Experts told This Is Croydon Today the delay in finding the body had made it much harder to determine exactly how Tia had died, and without a cause of death, the prosecution would find it much harder to build a case. However, detectives suspected, and it was widely reported, that Tia Sharp had potentially been smothered, although this was not officially proven to be the cause of death. Area Commander Neil Bissu said the priority was now to support her devastated family as they tried to ascertain exactly what had happened. With Tia's body now being found, the eyes of investigators quickly fell on one person, Christine's partner, Stuart Hazel. But officers soon realized that Hazel was on the run. He was picked up on CCTV buying a bottle of vodka from a shop on Canning Hill Lane in South London. They warned the public not to approach him if they saw him and to instead call 999. The police quickly mobilized and launched a search to try and find him. Following a tip-off from a member of the public who had spotted him, He was arrested at 825 on Cannon Hill Common in Morden. As he was taken away in a police van, members of the public hurled abuse as it went past. The police also announced soon after that they had made 2 further arrests. Later that evening at 11:55, Christine was arrested on suspicion of murder, and her neighbor had been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. While Christine was being questioned, Natalie had to watch on television as her daughter's body was removed from the home. Due to the state of decomposition, Natalie was not allowed to see her daughter's body. Since news of the discovery broke, several people laid tributes for her near a garage close to her grandmother's house, which still had a cordon in place on the approach to it. Christine was later released on bail, but would not be allowed anywhere near Natalie or her other grandchildren. The police soon started to learn the sinister truth about the man Tia had called Granddad. Stuart Hazel came from a highly dysfunctional background and had a troubled relationship with his parents. During his childhood, he was on the radar of social services as his father was in prison and his mother was a sex worker. He would also soon end up in care. He struggled in school and would often skip classes, and according to Dr. Carrie Nixon, it was also clear that he had a low IQ. Hazel would later say that he had been raped when he was 16 years old. He had 30 previous convictions and had been to prison 3 times. His convictions included dealing drugs, burglary, criminal damage, theft, as well as racially motivated violence and grievous bodily harm, also known as GBH. As Hazel was still using drugs, this would often lead him to continued reckless behavior. For example, in 2010, he was convicted of carrying a machete and was subsequently given a 12-month custodial sentence. Despite this, Christine stood by him and said she never saw any violent behavior in the home. She said although he drank and had a criminal record, he was a gentle giant. She was prepared to put his past from before they met behind them. She was, however, unaware of the extent of his drug abuse and his increasingly sinister thoughts. As Tia continued to grow up, little did she or her family know that Hazel was having sexual fantasies about her. He was fascinated and fixated with her and was convinced that she loved him. He became infatuated with her, and as she started to develop into a young woman, these feelings started to intensify. In the last year of her life, he became increasingly more voyeuristic and started filming her in secret. On one occasion, she came home from school and started to put cream on her legs as they were dry, and he started to secretly record her. His filming of Tia was growing increasingly sinister, and he started filming her while she was asleep. Nick Scola, who was the senior investigating officer, described one of these occasions. Hazel had filmed her while she was asleep, getting very close to her but then pulling back when she stirred. He then panned the camera up to the wall momentarily to film his shadow looking over her. He removed the door on the bathroom and messed with the light fitting in her bedroom, which police later believed was so he could use that as a spy hole to watch her. He also began watching and searching for more extreme and violent pornography on his phone, including pedophilia. It has been suggested by forensic psychologist Dr. Carrie Nixon that Hazel may have made such advances towards Tia and murdered her when she rejected said advances and threatened to tell her mother. One thing that many people wanted answers to was why had it taken 4 searches to find her body in the attic. Investigators apologized to the family, saying this was the result of human error. Commander Neil Bissu apologized to Tia Sharp's mother for the delay in finding her body. He said that a review would be undertaken to ensure such a failing is not repeated. On the August 23rd, Police Commissioner Bernard Hogan Howe addressed the failure of his force to find her body. He said, "If we thought it was an individual human error, then that would explain it, but we're carrying out a review because we're not happy that explains it. We're trying not to have a knee-jerk reaction. We need some time to understand what happened and what failed to happen. We want to learn lessons from this particular case. We have apologized, and I repeat that apology to Tia's mom and family for not having found Tia's body sooner." As Christine was released on bail, investigators turned their attention back to Stuart Hazel. He gave a defense case statement which said that he and Tia had been messing around and playing. During this, he alleged that she had fallen down the stairs, but appeared to be unharmed and okay. He then said that after drinking excessively through the evening, he passed out and upon waking up, he found her dead on the floor, and as a result hid her body in the attic. Once in the attic, he put her between the rafters and pushed her tight against the roof, where the roof met the floor in a dark area of the loft, covering the body with debris from around the attic. Next to the body, carefully wrapped in small plastic bags inside a black bin bag, were Tia's clothes that she was wearing that night, as well as her broken glasses. Christine was subsequently cleared of having any involvement in her granddaughter's killing, and on the December 7th, the Metropolitan Police announced that she would not face charges. In a previous search, officers had found 2 memory cards, one of which was very well hidden in a door frame of a downstairs room. The memory cards in question contained both deleted and undeleted material made up of photos and videos. The last shot on the memory card had been deleted, but officers were able to recover it. The image was of Tia, who had been posed in a sexually suggestive position. They showed the image in question to a pathologist, who determined that she was likely dead when the photograph had been taken. Other images showed Hazel posing naked in a similar position to the one she was seen in the photograph. The memory card also contained voyeuristic images of Tia taken when she was alive. In the early hours of August 12th, Hazel was charged with murder of the girl who had called him granddad. He appeared before Camberwell Green Magistrates Court on August 13th via a video link. Dressed in a blue t-shirt, he was seen on the video link sitting at a table with a policewoman standing behind him. He spoke to confirm his name, date of birth, and his address as the Lindens, New Addington, South London, where Tia had been found dead. No plea was entered and the case was committed to the Old Bailey Courthouse in London for trial. He was remanded in custody to Belmarsh Prison, where he was kept in isolation for his own safety. While in prison awaiting trial, Stuart Hazel wrote a letter to his father and he was sticking to his story. He described her death as an accident and denied there was any sexual motive. His main concern was that his father didn't think his son was a nonce, a slang term for a pedophile. Tia Sharp was cremated on the September 14th after a private family funeral. On the February 5th, 2013, the neighbor who had been arrested at the same time as Pristine was charged with wasting police time after telling the police he had seen Tia alive on the day she was murdered. He appeared on the August 5th, 2013. He was found guilty of wasting police time on August 5th, 2013. He was found guilty of wasting police time and was sentenced to 5 months in prison. After an agonizing investigation, it was soon time for the trial of Stuart Hazel, and his plea was not guilty. He showed no emotion during his trial and refused to acknowledge any of Tia's family. The courtroom was shocked when they were shown the images that had been taken of Tia. When the photo of her that had been taken post-mortem was shown to the jury, her mother, Natalie, had to leave the courtroom traumatized and in tears. After 4 days of distressing evidence being given, Stuart Hazel changed his plea to guilty. However, he refused to reveal exactly what happened that night or why he had taken her life in the most brutal way imaginable. When sentencing Hazel, the judge emphasized how the trust Christine and Natalie had placed in him had been shattered. He received life in prison with a minimum term of 38 years that he must serve before he can even be considered for parole. This will mean he will be 75 years old before he is eligible. The judge, Mr. Justice Nicol, said he could not impose a whole life tariff as he was not sure Hazel's motivation was sexual or that it was premeditated. He said, "Tia's mother trusted you to look after Tia. You breached that trust in the most grievous way possible. Your guilty plea came on day 5. You said you wished to avoid causing further stress to Tia's family. That is commendable, but they have had to endure 4 days of a very public trial. The aftermath of Tia's death was felt by so many people. The house that Christine and Stuart had lived in and where Tia had been murdered was demolished in 2013. In July 2013, her father, Stephen Carter, said he backed a plan for websites to block certain search terms and warn people when they try and view illegal content. In November 2013, partly in response to the murders of Tia Sharp and April Jones, a little girl who was abducted and murdered by a stranger, the search engines Google and Bing modified their systems to block results from searches aimed at producing child abuse images. Tia Sharp was a confident, happy, and feisty young girl whose trust was betrayed in the most appalling way imaginable. Those who knew and loved her are determined that she will be remembered for the joy she brought to so many people and not by the tragic way that she left this earth. Joe Roy McMillan, age 79 and from Carthage, Texas, went missing on May 21, 2020. The last confirmed sighting of him was at Ted's Saw Shop on FM 1970 near Clayton, Texas. Throughout the investigation, surveillance footage, primarily from gas station cameras, revealed multiple sightings of Joe's blue 2004 GMC Sierra traveling south on Route 59. The final footage placing him was in Livingston, Texas, over 100 miles south of Carthage. Authorities speculated that Joe might have been heading towards the Houston area, where he had family, based on these observations. This unplanned trip may also have been due to complications from a health condition. Joe was diabetic, and his family also feared that he was beginning to show signs of dementia. On August 6, 2020, authorities in Brazoria County, Texas were working in a bayou near the town of Freeport to remove 2 vehicles from the water. The site was just after a sharp turn in a nearby road, and accidents were common there. While they were there to retrieve 2 vehicles known to have gone off the road and into the water the night before, they unexpectedly found a 3rd vehicle, a blue 2004 GMC Sierra. Joe's remains were inside of the vehicle. While the circumstances of the vehicle's discovery indicated that Joe was killed after his car accidentally went off the road and into the water, the Texas Rangers still processed the scene. No signs of foul play were found. Joe was laid to rest during a private funeral service. He is survived by his wife of 60 years, Bonnie Sue, 3 children, 3 grandchildren, and a great-granddaughter. We are saddened by the confirmation, but at the same time, we're just glad to finally have some answers and to get some closure for all that has happened, Joe's grandson, Michael McMillan, told KLTV. Richelle Thomas Stubblefield was a gifted athlete, attending Calumet College of St. Joseph in Whiting, Indiana on a track and field scholarship. She had to take a step back from running in 2015 when she became pregnant. She was expecting a boy, whom she planned to name Amir Deshaun Thomas Stubblefield. Her due date, December 15th, was just 10 days before her own birthday on Christmas Day. In 2015, she would have turned 21. November 10th, 2015 started out as a normal day for Richelle. She went to her classes and then attended a women's basketball game in the evening. The game was the last place she was seen. When her family stopped hearing from her, they reported her missing on November 12th. After Richelle disappeared, some of her friends reported to police that she had been planning to go to Gary, Indiana to visit the father of her unborn son. It does appear that Richelle made it to Gary as her car was found abandoned in the 1800 block of Martin Luther King Drive there, and her shoes and broken eyeglasses were found in the same area. By 2020, authorities were confident enough that the man Richelle was going to see was involved in her disappearance to arrest him. 25-year-old Dern Fuller was arrested in July of 2020 and charged with 1 count of obstruction of justice and 2 counts of murder, 1 for Richelle and 1 for her unborn son. At the time of his arrest, he was a member of the 19th Engineer Battalion at Fort Knox in Kentucky. He had joined the Army in January of 2016, 2 months after Richelle's disappearance. After he was taken into custody in Kentucky, he was extradited back to Indiana. While Fuller is charged with murdering Richelle, her body has not been recovered. Court documents related to Fuller's arrest revealed new information about the investigation into Richelle's disappearance and seemed to confirm that Fuller was the person of interest in the case who was being investigated but not publicly discussed by police in 2015. Fuller was interviewed by authorities in November of 2015 and told them he did not know where Richelle was, but she had talked to him about going to Atlanta. He denied being her boyfriend or the father of her unborn child. He said he knew Richelle had told her that he was, but that he didn't know why. 10 days after Richelle was last seen, police in Indiana received a tip from police in Illinois. 2 of Fuller's cousins had come forward claiming that he had confessed to them during a phone call that he had killed a woman who was 8 months with his child. He was afraid of being asked to pay child support and therefore choked her and stabbed her in her temple. He then buried her body behind Williams Elementary School in Gary. 3 days later, Fuller was taken into custody at the home of another woman with whom he was romantically involved. When she was interviewed by police, she told them that she had picked Fuller up from the track at Williams Elementary School after he called her and asked for a ride. He told her that something had happened to Richelle and that he was responsible for it. The grounds of the elementary school were searched with cadaver dogs twice, once in August of 2016 and once in January of 2017. During the second search, the dogs indicated that there were human remains present on a hillside behind the school, but nothing was found when police began digging up the area. In August of 2019, Butler's girlfriend from 2015 was now his ex-girlfriend, and she was living in Texas. Investigators traveled there to speak to her again, promising her immunity from prosecution in the case. During this interview, she stated that Fuller had been throwing items that belonged to Richelle out of the car window as they drove away from the elementary school, and that he told her he killed Richelle by choking her. Fuller's defense attorney has said that he finds it odd that his client was arrested in 2020 when police have not found any new significant information. Their reasoning will hopefully become clear as the case Richelle's body still has not been found. On June 13, 1993, a woman called the property manager for her apartment on Pillsbury Avenue in Minneapolis, Minnesota to complain that water was leaking into her unit. The manager determined that the water was coming from a certain apartment in the building, but no one answered the door when he went to it. After he let himself in, he found that the source of the water was the shower, which had been left running. He also found a large amount of blood in the nude body of 35-year-old Jeannie Childs. She had been stabbed multiple times. Jeannie was a sex worker who brought clients back to this apartment, which was rented by her boyfriend who had been out of state at the time of her murder. Her case went cold, but several items were collected from the scene. Eventually, they were tested for DNA. A DNA profile was developed from sperm cells on items from the scene and from 2 other non-sperm cell fraction samples taken from Jeannie's towel and comforter. This DNA profile was not found in any criminal databases, but in 2018, it was run through a commercial DNA site, and genetic genealogy was used to identify a suspect who had been living in Minneapolis at the time of the murder. That suspect was placed under surveillance, and in early 2019, authorities followed him to a hockey game. There, they witnessed him eat a hot dog and wipe his mouth with a napkin. When he threw the napkin away, they collected it. The DNA found on the napkin was a match to the DNA from the crime scene. The suspect was 52-year-old Jerry Westrom, a married father of 3. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in February 2019. A direct DNA sample was then taken from him and confirmed the DNA match. Speaking with police after his arrest, Westrom denied any involvement in Jeannie's murder. He further claimed that he had never even been in that apartment or that apartment complex. When he was shown a picture of Jeannie, Westrom said he did not recognize her and claimed that he had not had sex with any woman in Minneapolis in 1993. He could not explain why his DNA was at the scene. He posted bail and was released. Westrom, with the support of his family, maintains his innocence. His lawyer has claimed that the evidence against his client is thin because some of the DNA came from sperm and the victim was a sex worker. In April of 2019, authorities announced that another piece of evidence tied Westrom to the scene, a bare footprint left in Jeannie's blood, which was a match to Westrom's footprint. Westrom was originally charged with second-degree murder at the time of his 2019 arrest. However, on June 25, 2020, a grand jury indicted him for first-degree premeditated murder in the case. He turned himself in to the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office the following Monday. With the charge increased, a judge also increased his bail to $2 million, up from the $500,000 it had been set at following his initial arrest on a second-degree charge in 2019. He was able to post it and was released on July 16th. At the end of July 2020, Westrom's trial date was finally set for April 19, 2021. Hearings in the case were originally delayed because the defense was waiting for evidence in the case, which Westerham's lawyer says they are still waiting for. Proceedings have now been delayed due to the ongoing pandemic. Aileen Canab was born on December 22, 1875, in Rugenwald, a seaside town on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. During that time, Reunited was part of the German Empire, though it later became part of Poland after World War II and is now known by its Polish name. After her mother's death, Aileen was sent to live with her uncle. She experienced a modest upbringing, spending her early years working in the fields and vineyards of a small village. Despite her humble circumstances, Aileen possessed a deep passion for learning. Inspired by the work of Louis Pasteur, she aspired to become a doctor, a dream that seemed out of reach due to her economic status and the restrictions barring women from attending German medical schools at the time. In the second half of the 19th century, large numbers of people from Central Europe immigrated to the United States, with many of them settling in the rapidly growing cities of what is now called the Midwest. One of these individuals was Aileen's cousin, Augusta Nabi, who had immigrated to Indianapolis, Indiana. The cousins kept in touch through letters, and Augusta informed Aileen that there were some medical schools in the United States that would admit women. Aileen then spent several years working and scraping together enough money to finance her own immigration to America, finally succeeding and moving to Indianapolis in 1896. This was just the first phase of Aileen spent several more years working as a seamstress and domestic servant, both to finance her education and perfect her English. By working for families in the upper, more educated class, she was able to learn the language at a level that would allow her to be successful at the collegiate level. Aileen attended Butler University and then finally achieved her goal of attending medical school, enrolling at the Medical College of Indiana in 1900. The curriculum was rigorous and time-consuming, but Aileen still managed to find the time to continue working as a seamstress to support herself. She was also able to find a way to make money in a manner related to her studies, drawing illustrations from medical textbooks. Aileen excelled in medical school, becoming the only preceptee taken on by the school's director of pathology in one of her years of study. She was also asked to teach undergraduate students and was eventually placed in charge of the pathology labs. She graduated in 1904, one of only 2 women in the graduating class. While Aileen now had a medical degree, her gender limited her opportunities as a doctor. She initially remained working at the medical college, working in the lab and serving as a clinical professor in an unpaid capacity. In 1905, she became Indiana's first female deputy state health officer. The position involved clinical tasks, such as process examples and public health outreach, tracing possible outbreaks of disease and making recommendations to improve hygiene practices throughout the state. Dr. Canab eventually was promoted to an assistant bacteriologist, which required more hours in the lab and more travel. In addition to these extra responsibilities, she continued studying, using the most current research to improve health conditions in Indiana and speaking to the press and to local groups to educate the public on the best practices to maintain sanitary conditions in their communities. A major area of focus of Dr. Canab's research was rabies. Her work helped her develop cutting-edge protocols to educate the public about the disease and to try to prevent its spread. Within just a few years, she was widely considered to be the expert on the disease in the state of Indiana. Despite this, when the State Board of Health needed a new superintendent of the bacteriological laboratory, Dr. Canab was asked to take on the work of the position, but only as the acting superintendent. Dr. J.N. HRDY, the Secretary of the Indiana State Board of Health, assured her that she would ultimately be awarded the permanent superintendent position and her annual salary would increase from $1,400 to $1,800 or $2,000 when she was. After more than a year of serving as the acting superintendent, Dr. Canab was told by Dr. Hurdy that there was no money for her promotion and raise, and that because she was a woman, she did not merit the pay raise in November of 1908. Dr. Canab resigned in protest and told the story of discrimination and false promises to the press. Dr. HRDY then named a new male superintendent, Dr. Simmons, somehow finding the funds to pay him $2,000 in his first year and $3,000 in his second. In 1909, Dr. Simmons published Dr. Canab's research on rabies in the Indiana State Board of Health Bulletin without citing her as the source of the information. Dr. Canab then went into private practice, seeing patients while continuing her research on rabies. Her academic career also began to flourish during this time. She became the chair of the parasitology and hematology department at Indiana Veterinary College, where she was the first woman to be elected to the faculty. In addition, She served as a medical director and an associate professor of physiology and hygiene at the Normal College of the North American Gymnastics Union. Dr. Canab both lived and worked out of a set of rooms in a building on the northeast corner of Delaware and Michigan Avenues in Indianapolis. The unit was set up for her to see patients and also had a bedroom. A young woman named Catherine McPherson worked out of the apartment with Dr. Canab as her office assistant. On the morning of October 25, 1911, Catherine arrived at 8:15 as usual. Looking into the bedroom, she saw her employer lying on the bed. The doctor normally slept with her head at the foot of the bed. Today, she was lying the other way, and her head had been shoved under the steel beam at the head of the bed. Her nightgown had been pushed up past would reveal that she had died at least 6 hours before her body was discovered. Police initially believed that the doctor's death was a suicide. The police chief, Martin Hyland, believed that at 5 feet 6 inches tall and 158 pounds, the doctor was too strong to be unable to fight off any attacker and strong enough to inflict such a gruesome injury to herself. Catherine McPherson's behavior on mourning Dr. Canab's body was discovered seemingly supported this theory. Catherine had not called the police for almost an hour after she discovered her employer's body. She would later say that she was in shock from the scene she had found and did not comprehend at the time that the doctor was dead, instead believing that Dr. Canab still required help. Therefore, she began calling various physicians and Dr. Canab's cousin, Augusta, as she had been instructed to do in case of an emergency. The police were not called until after numerous people had been to the scene and confirmed that Dr. Canab was dead and the trash had been taken out by the building's janitor. This delay and its consequences, of course, created major problems for the investigation. It was the opinion of the police, however, that the delay had been intentional and that Catherine McPherson and Augusta Canab had used that time to dispose of the weapon the doctor had used to take her own life, as no weapon was found at the scene. The coroner, however, was adamant that Dr. Canab's death was a homicide. He based his ruling on circumstantial factors but also on physical evidence, like the defensive wounds on the body and the position of Dr. Canab's hands. There had in fact been 2 deep cuts made on her neck as well, and he did not believe it was possible for her to inflict them on herself. Furthermore, the doctor was right-handed, meaning that if she had taken her own life, the cuts would have been made from left to right, but they were in fact made on the right side of her body. Further supporting the idea that Dr. Canab had been murdered was a bloody fingerprint found on her pillow. The doctor did not have blood on her hands when she was found. Jefferson Haynes, the building's janitor, lived below Dr. Canab's apartment and reported hearing screams and then something falling to the floor during the night. He could not be sure which unit the noises were coming from, so he did not go upstairs to investigate further. When he woke up for the day around 5:30 a.m., he thought he heard someone walking in the apartment above. There were no signs of forced entry into the doctor's apartment and nothing had been taken. There were some signs of a struggle in the bedroom. One of her slippers was near the bathroom, while the other was found near her bed, and the robe was found in disarray on the floor. Dr. Canab's murder was heavily speculated about in the media, with a number of salacious motives for the crime being suggested. Some articles held that she had been killed by a fellow German immigrant with whom she disagreed politically. Others speculated that she had been killed by some sort of sex maniac. Dr. Canab's main area of focus in her position at the Normal College was what we would today refer to as sexual health. She spoke to people throughout the state and across economic and racial lines about sexual health and hygiene practices, leading some to wonder if someone she was treating for a sexually transmitted disease or a sexually related psychological problem may have killed her. 2 individuals were eventually charged with Dr. Canab's murder, although the court case only increased the scrutiny of her career and lifestyle. 15 months after her death, Dr. William Craig was indicted for her murder and Alonzo Ragsdale was indicted as an accomplice to the crime. Their arrests were the result of an investigation by Detective Harry Webster. The private investigator had been hired using funds raised by other female doctors in Indianapolis and various women's groups to look into the case, although he remained involved in the investigation even after the funds ran out. Dr. Craig had been born in Scotland and immigrated to the United States when he was around the age of 12. He was a widower and had one daughter, Marion. He was 14 years old at the time of his trial. He was the dean of students at Indiana Veterinary College and also served as a lecturer there. He had known Dr. Canab since 1905 and had been the person who had recommended her for her position at the school. Drs. Craig and Canab were apparently having a variety of professional and personal problems around the time of Dr. Canab's death. At the veterinary college, they were in the middle of a heated disagreement about altering the lecture schedule to accommodate Dr. Canab's commitments at the normal college. The two doctors may also have been engaged to be married, although Dr. Craig would deny this. There were witnesses and letters attesting to the fact that Dr. Canab claimed to be getting married, and she had recently ordered a fancy dress. She did not normally wear overly formal things and could make her dresses herself, thanks to her years spent working as a seamstress, leading to speculation that she may have intended this dress to be her bridal gown. Shortly before her murder, Dr. Craig's housekeeper overheard the two of them arguing in his home. The argument appeared to be about Dr. Craig wanting Dr. Canab to stop working following their marriage, and Dr. Canab arguing that they could both continue to practice. The housekeeper also signed an affidavit saying that Dr. Craig had come home late on the night of October 24th and quickly changed his clothes, then left unusually early the following morning, the morning Dr. Canab's body was discovered. The housekeeper, while called to testify at Dr. Craig's trial, refused to do so. Dr. Craig's defense team relied heavily on the theory that Dr. Canab had taken her own life at trial. They called in witnesses who painted Dr. Canab as aggressive and mean-spirited because she had to fight to be taken seriously in her profession, and claimed that her finances were in disarray. They claimed that as an unmarried 35-year-old woman living in a modest apartment who was financially and professionally unsuccessful, Dr. Canab would of course be unhappy enough to want to end her life. Further examination of Dr. Canab's records showed that she was financially stable due to her various jobs. She simply chose to send any extra she had to her uncle, who was no longer able to work, rather than spend it on herself. Her estate only appeared to be in debt because its executor was the other man indicted for her murder, Alonzo Ragsdale. Ragsdale was an undertaker and associate of Dr. Canab's who was accused of being an accomplice to the murder because he allegedly washed the silk kimono Dr. Canab had been wearing the night of her murder in an effort to disguise blood-stained evidence on Dr. Craig's behalf. The kimono had been a Christmas gift from Dr. Canab's cousin, Augusta. Ragsdale was also an early vocal supporter of the suicide theory. Ragsdale did not collect on debts or file proper and accurate paperwork for Dr. Canab's estate. Her belongings disappeared, but the proceeds from their sale was never applied to the $158 of debt attributed to her estate. The trial went on for 9 days before the judge instructed the members of the jury to acquit Dr. Craig of the charges against him. He said that while the prosecution had proven that Dr. Canab had been murdered, there was simply not enough evidence that Dr. Craig had been the one who killed her. Since Dr. Craig was not convicted of the murder, Alonzo Ragsdale could not be found guilty as his accomplice, and the charges against him were dropped. No one else has ever been charged or convicted in the crime. Ragsdale had Dr. Canab's estate declared insolvent despite still never collecting on all the debts owed to her. As a result, there were no funds available to purchase a headstone for her. Her grave at the Crown Hill Cemetery remained unmarked for decades, while their Nicole Kabrowski and her husband Michael eventually purchased her a headstone a century after her untimely death. Susan Sutera was one of 3 children and spent her childhood in Saugus, Massachusetts. Known for her creativity, she enjoyed making Halloween costumes for younger children in her neighborhood during her teenage years. After graduating from Saugus High School, Sue pursued her passion for creativity through education, first attending a local community college and later studying at the Massachusetts College of Art. Throughout this time, she harbored a dream of becoming a cartoonist, aware that pursuing an artistic career might pose financial challenges. She took a job with Northwest Airlines at Logan International Airport after graduating from college. She wanted to work on the ramp, but she had to start out at the airline in other positions. Sue began her career at Northwest cleaning cabins and working the ticket counter, but quickly progressed with the company. Within 5 years, not only was she working on the ramp, but she was a ramp supervisor. Sue reported to work for her 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift on Saturday, September 12, 1992. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, 27-year-old Sue left work to pick up some sandwiches for her and some of her co-workers. She never returned. None of her did anything when she failed to come back for the rest of her shift, which was something that she had never done before during her years with the company. When Sue wasn't home that Sunday morning, her parents assumed that she had gone straight to church. They left home for the day, and when they came back, they looked in Sue's room and saw clothes on the floor. They assumed that they had been left there recently and that Sue had come home and then left for her next shift while they were out of the house. Sue's mother Marlene typically saw Sue coming home from her shifts as she was leaving to go to work, so she was slightly concerned when she left home at 8:30 a.m. on Monday 14th without seeing her daughter. After Marlene arrived at work, she got a phone call from her other daughter Debbie. Debbie had just gotten a phone call from someone at Northwest asking to speak with Sue. Sue had still not come home even though she was due to go with Debbie to a fitting for her wedding dress. Later that day, Sue's car was found in an auto body shop on Route 1A in the city of Revere, north of the airport. Sue's body was discovered in the trunk of the car. She had been severely beaten as well as stabbed. Sue had loved the cartoon character Snoopy and had a massive collection of Snoopy memorabilia. She had the opportunity to meet Snoopy's creator, Charles Schulz, 7 months before her murder. After her death, he drew a Snoopy for Sue that was put on her gravestone. Sue was a valuable and had advanced to a supervisor position with Northwest. Many of her co-workers appreciated how hard she worked and how far out of her way she would go to help her co-workers. However, her work life was far from perfect. Sue had to fight for her job and fight to keep it. She worked mainly with men and in a position traditionally held by a man. When she finally became a ground services employee working on the ramp as she had hoped, she was only the second woman Northwest had given that position to at Logan International. She had to fight to finally be promoted to a who had illegally bid for the job. Sue was subjected to widespread sexual harassment and threats from a large group of her male coworkers while working in ground services. They left filthy messages about Sue and photographs of her throughout the airport and urinated on her locker. She received phone calls late at night and a male coworker smashed her radio. Following her promotion, her locker was also vandalized with graffiti, an image of a casket with Sue's name on it. Sue kept a detailed diary of 8 months' worth of these incidents, although according to some of her co-workers, the harassment continued on well beyond the period Sue detailed in her diary. Sue filed reports with both her union and with Northwest, but the behavior continued on unchecked. Sue assumed that she was being targeted by her co-workers simply because they did not want to be working with or for a woman, and that the harassment was being carried out in hopes of getting her to quit her job. She was determined to not be forced out despite the emotional toll that the harassment was taking on her. No one was going to take the job Sue had fought so hard for away from her. Sue's mother Marlene has come to believe that there was an entirely different motive for at least some of the later harassment as well as for Sue's murder. Not long after Sue was killed, several of her co-workers were arrested for being part of a credit card theft ring. The arrests were made as part of a federal investigation that had begun in the summer of 1992. Baggage handlers on the ramp were stealing new credit cards that arrived at the airport through mail deliveries on Northwest aircraft. They were then either using the cards themselves or selling them. The individuals involved in the ring ultimately stole more than $7 million from the various credit card companies. Sue was not involved in this illegal activity. However, the fact that she was a supervisor meant that she could make decisions that would make continuing the scheme more difficult. For example, if she made sure the employees she was supervising were always at their assigned worksite, they would not have time to sneak off to hide the stolen cards. There is no evidence that Sue was aware of the thefts, but if the individuals committing them thought that she was, they may have increased their efforts to harass her with the aim of getting her to quit not just because she was a woman but because she was a threat to their criminal activities. 3 out of the 10 employees who were ultimately sentenced in the case had been named by Sue in her diary as some of the co-workers who had been harassing her. While the incidents listed in the diary predate Sue's promotion, these men's motives for harassing Sue could have shifted time if the members of the theft ring became more convinced that Sue was onto them. Keeping her from reporting their illegal activity could have been a potential motive in her murder. The Taraski's family sued Northwest Airlines for sexual harassment following Sue's murder. 3 years after her death, Northwest settled with the family for $75,000. They also agreed to provide $250,000 as a reward for information that leads to the arrest of Sue's killer. While the airline no longer exists, the reward fund does. Sue's father and brother have passed away, leaving her mother Marlene and sister Debbie as the main champions justice in her case. Sue now has 2 nieces and a nephew who have been raised on stories of their Aunt Sue and assurances of how much she would have loved them. Marlene regularly gives interviews and has made 2 videos with the Massachusetts State Police to keep the case active in people's memory and to ask witnesses to come forward. Even after almost 30 years of looking for answers, her dedication to her daughter's case has not wavered. "I am a very healthy woman, and I am not going away," she said in 2014. Speaking to her daughter's killer, she said, "You are going to look over your shoulder until the day that I go. But I will get you, and I will get justice for my Susan." 38-year-old Jonathan Oyai had Thursday, June 11, 1998, off from work. He was a deputy of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, a K-9 handler with the Elite Special Enforcement Bureau. John planned to spend the majority of the day at Devil's Punch Bowl Natural Area, some 20 miles southeast of the home he shared with his wife Deborah and 5-year-old daughter Chloe in Palmdale. John was able to handle his prestigious but exceptionally challenging position because of his background as a paratrooper with the Army Special Forces Unit and his commitment to remaining in peak physical condition. He was a skilled runner who trained in rugged, remote locations and knew how to survive in the wilderness. He had just completed his 650-mile ultramarathon a few days prior and was at the Punch Bowl to train for a 100-mile run he would be undertaking in just 2 weeks. Participating in the Western States 100-mile endurance run was a long-held dream of John's, and he had been training for it daily and organizing a support team to assist him for the over 20 hours he would spend running. The mountains south of the Devil's Punch Bowl were a regular training site for him since he was familiar with them, and they helped prepare him for the difficult terrain he would be running over during the endurance run in Northern California. It is believed that Jonathan parked his truck and began his run around 11:45 a.m. Shortly after he began his run, he encountered a group of elementary school students. John and his canine summit of Mount Baden-Powell, which was roughly 20 miles away, and to the summit of Mount Baden-Powell, which was roughly 20 miles away and back, returning to the parking lot around sundown. 2 park employees saw a man believed to be John in the park over the following several hours, and a third saw a man with a backpack like the one John had taken with him walking towards the parking lot around 6 p.m. Jonathan did not return home as planned, however, and his wife called the Palmdale Sheriff's Station to report him missing at 11 p.m. 2 deputies found John's white Ford pickup truck still in the parking lot, and the search and rescue squad with the department was called in to look for John by 11:30. Multiple other organizations and agencies would join the effort the following morning. Even as the search for John went on for over a day, there was still hope that he would be found alive because he was so well trained in outdoor survival and physically fit. However, as several more days went on with no sign of him despite extensive aerial and ground searches, the optimism began to wane. 6 days after John went missing, the sergeant leading the search announced to the search teams that it was believed that John had committed suicide. While the official search ended, friends of John's and members of law enforcement continued looking for him on their own. The closest thing to physical evidence that John took his own life was the fact that his off-duty firearm, which he did not normally take with him on runs, was unaccounted for. A local resident had also reported hearing what they believed to be a gunshot in the early evening hours of June 11th. The suicide theory was best supported by John's mental state at the time of his disappearance. John had been going through a difficult time. His marriage was falling apart, and he and Deborah had gone to their first joint therapy session a day before he vanished. On the morning of June 11th, he had told Deborah to have a nice life and tell Chloe that he loved her before he left to drive out to site for his run. At the time, Deborah thought that these statements indicated that he was through with their marriage, although she realized that they could have indicated that he was suicidal after he failed to return home. Most of John's loved ones do not believe that he would have taken his own life, however. Most importantly, he was dedicated to his daughter Chloe. He was also excited about a new romantic relationship he was pursuing. John was tired of living in Southern California and had been looking into moving to a remote part of Alaska, where he would be surrounded by few people and many opportunities for outdoor activities. John's sister believes he may have staged his disappearance and left for Alaska under a new name. One of the other reasons John had wanted to leave California was the explosion of crime in the more rural areas of the Antelope Valley. 6 violent drug rings were producing massive amounts of methamphetamine in the area. These drug rings and the investigation into them by the authorities would prove to have numerous, uncorroborated connections to John's disappearance. Within the first week of John going missing, 2 individuals with ties to biker gangs producing meth in the area told authorities that John had come across a meth lab that was operating underground, near the area where he had last been heading during his run. In their words, John was then taken care of. By early 2000, 9 more individuals connected to the meth trade had provided the same story. Some of them also reported that the resident deputy assigned to the area that included Devil's Punch Bowl natural area had been involved in John's disappearance. A Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy being involved with criminal activity was not inconceivable. 35 deputies from the department had been indicted for stealing $1 million from drug dealers in the early 1990s. Other deputies were arrested for unrelated crimes, and the FBI had video evidence of other criminal activity committed by deputies. The sheriff at the time had asked the FBI for assistance in removing the corrupt deputies from his department, but he passed away in 1998. By that time, rumors were circulating that deputies were working with the drug rings, warning them in advance of any planned raids. Homicide detective Larry Brandenburg learned of John's potential murder and the alleged involvement of the resident deputy in December of 1999. He found a location near Devil's Punch Bowl that could have been the site of the underground meth lab the informants had described and collected evidence that seemingly corroborated some of their statements. Based on these findings, he applied for a search warrant to examine the phone and financial records of the local resident deputy to see if his involvement in the case could be corroborated. The district attorney signed off on the warrant, but when Brandenburg took the paperwork to his boss for his signature, not only did he refuse to sign it, but he ultimately took Brandenburg off the case when he tried to pursue it further. During his investigation, Detective Brandenburg had asked Deputy Darren Hager to speak with one of his informants about the resident deputy's possible involvement with drug rings. The informant claimed that the resident deputy was involved with drug trafficking and potentially John's disappearance. When Hager reported this information he was told not to investigate any wrongdoing by other deputies or John's disappearance. Information about the former was to go to Internal Affairs, and information about the latter should be sent to Detective Brandenburg. In March of 2000, Hager had been assigned to a joint task force with the Drug Enforcement Agency. Operation Silent Thunder, as it was called, spent almost a year infiltrating local drug rings, setting up wiretaps, and obtaining informants. The operation resulted in the arrests of 100 of people who were prosecuted by the state of California, 32 federal convictions, and 5 out of the 6 area kingpins going to prison. In 2002, Hager traveled to Washington, D.C. to be presented with the DEA's Administrator's Award in honor of his work on the operation. During the course of the operation, Hager had witnessed specific incidents of deputy misconduct and learned of specific connections the resident deputy alleged to be involved in John's disappearance may have had to a local drug dealer. He also had 3 new witnesses provide information about John's disappearance. One of them claimed to have witnessed his murder, one claimed to know where his body was buried, and the third said that he had heard screaming after he saw John walk in the direction of 2 armed bikers the day he went missing. As instructed, Hager passed all of this on to other departments. The homicide captain, who had previously refused to sign off on Detective Brandenburg's application for a search warrant, refused to meet with members of the task force to discuss the new leads or assign a detective to follow up on them. In June of 2002, the resident deputy, suspected of wrongdoing, and 5 other deputies filed a complaint against Hager, claiming that he had used falsified documents and warrants to defame the resident deputy during his time on the task force. Within a week, the department concluded that all of the witnesses Hager had identified who had been vetted by the DEA and were being used in federal court cases were all unreliable, and that John O.J. had taken his own life because of his marital problems. Hager was reassigned while he was investigated by Internal Affairs for the next 11 months. At the end of the investigation, Hager faced 2 charges: falsifying information and conducting a personnel investigation of the resident deputy. The first charge was based on errors and summaries Hager had not written. The standard punishment for these offenses under the disciplinary guidelines of the department was a 15-day suspension. Instead, Hager was fired despite having been rated as outstanding during his 3 previous performance reviews with the department. Hager could not find work due to the nature of these charges, and eventually filed for bankruptcy protection. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against both Los Angeles County and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, alleging that his termination was whistleblower retaliation. A jury awarded him $4,500,000 in lost earnings and damages. The county and department appealed the judgment for the following 3 years, but eventually had to pay Hager $2,500,000 plus interest, which made his final payout around $3 million. Hager, no longer feeling safe within the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, has since moved out of the area. In 2015, John's wife Deborah was homeless and living in her car, supporting herself with only a $950 a month disability check she receives because she cannot work due to an extreme form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And his daughter Chloe was living in Los Angeles with her boyfriend and his mother. In March 2020, a woman named Chloe O.J., who was the same age as John's daughter, passed away in Idaho, although it is unconfirmed if this woman was in fact John's daughter or just another woman with the same name. In the more than 20 years since John disappeared, no sign of him or his remains has ever been found. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.